Over the last 2 weeks, federal prosecutors in Minnesota have charged 9 people with defrauding 2 different Medicaid programs, and they say this is just the beginning. Last week, federal prosecutors charged a woman for defrauding a state autism treatment program out of $14 million. And the week prior, 8 people were charged with defrauding the state's housing stabilization services. Now, the State Department of Human Services is suspending another disability program over fraud allegations. No one has been charged. This is all on top of more than 6 dozen people charged so far in the Feeding Our Future child nutrition scheme. Acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota Joe Thompson is the prosecutor in charge of all these cases. He joins me now in the studio. Thanks for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
I mean, just in what we just rattled off there in the introduction, it's alarming to hear about. And in recent interviews and news conferences that you've held, the ways that you've described fraud in this state are very concerning. You said it was like staring into a bottomless well of fraud. Just how bad is this problem in this state?
It's quite bad. It's program after program that we've looked at and found enormous levels of fraud to the tune of literally billions of dollars altogether.
Can you talk a little bit about how this happens? I know that some people have talked about, well, maybe during the COVID-19 pandemic, in the height of that, where people were in need of extra assistance, maybe things just kind of got lost in the shuffle. But what I've heard you say is this has been a long-standing problem that's really needed attention for some time.
It has, and obviously these investigations generally have grown out of the Feeding Our Future case and investigation, where we've charged now 76 people for defrauding the federal child nutrition program during COVID. And that really was a COVID fraud scheme. It took advantage of changes in the program that were implemented during COVID to make sure that kids were getting the meals they needed when they were in school. That being said, these other programs, they are not COVID fraud schemes. These are traditional healthcare fraud schemes or government benefit fraud schemes that have nothing to do with COVID and have everything to do with, problems in the way our programs are run here in the state of Minnesota.
And I mentioned there in our introduction that we learned about fraud allegations in a Medicaid-funded program called Integrated Community Supports, a disability services program. We're just learning about that from the state. Is your office looking into that, or have you been looking into that?
I mean, we're looking into many programs. The reality is, all these investigations during Feeding Our Future, we saw many of the defendants and individuals involved had healthcare companies, autism clinics, housing stabilization, ARMS, the adult rehabilitation services, and ICS and these other ones. And we've seen company after company, program after program that's been vulnerable to fraud. And we're looking into all of them in some ways, but obviously there's limits to our resources.
Obviously, you're investigating crimes, but as you look into that, are there things you're noticing that are specific to Minnesota that might make the problem worse here than other states?
Well, certainly we're traditionally a more generous state. Many of these programs are where it's called waivered Medicaid services, and so they're programs that are experimental in nature that our state has decided to participate in. We don't have to, but we've chosen to as a state. Many of them, we were the first, if not the first, one of the first to implement in the nation. For example, the Housing Stabilization Services program, we were the first state in the nation to participate in it. And I think in some of our, desire to make sure people are getting the treatment they need and the services they need, we lost sight of, program integrity concerns and making sure we have a real need there, and that the services we're providing or the program we're implementing is targeted to meet those needs.
NPR politics editor Brian Baxt actually asked Governor Tim Walz last week if he thought fraud was worse here in Minnesota than other states, and I'd like us to take a listen to what he had to say.
I think one of the things is Minnesota's a more generous state, so there's just simply more opportunity. I think our administration and the folks who are over there, the professionals who are not political appointees, now have more tools to stop that. They now have more authority to do that. And just to be very clear, these programs are written by the legislature, and we needed to write them and tighten them up. So it's a partnership. The thing that you don't see from Republicans is just claiming this. Where are they on the fraud in D.C.? Where are they on Medicaid? Where are they on the other things? They're not. So look, this is one thing we agree on. I'm with them on this. We need to crack down. We need more tools. We need to put these people in jail. The difference is I'm doing it.
Do you have any thoughts about that? Some of what he was saying about Minnesota being a really generous state are things that you shared as well, but this has also obviously become something that has become political and people on both sides of the aisle talking about it. I mean, what do you think about just some of the ideas there about cracking down and about, is this about law enforcement or is this about getting inside of the systems and seeing what's going on?
Well, I think it's going to have to be both. Obviously, we can't, as I've said, we can't prosecute our way out of this issue. We have limited resources. Even the federal government has limited resources. The U.S. Attorney's Office has very limited resources, and we aren't just responsible for prosecuting fraud. We have all these other responsibilities as well. So it's going to have to be, in addition to prosecutions and criminal investigations, there's going to have to be other steps taken on a regulatory front. But also, I think just looking at the programs themselves and asking ourselves, are they set up in a way that makes sense?
Where is the oversight for these programs? Is it sort of just hoping that people will act in good faith and there maybe isn't enough staff to actually follow up with people? Or how does it occur?
Well, the Department of Human Services is responsible for these. How they work as a regulator, it's not. I don't work there. I don't have full insight into how they operate. Obviously, they're now. I think everyone agrees that we need to do more as a state, and DHS needs to do more in making sure that these programs have integrity. And when I say have integrity, what we mean is they're not being defrauded on a massive scale, to make sure that the money that's being paid out is going to provide real services that are necessary to people who need them.
Last week, I spoke with the Autism Society of Minnesota's executive director. Her name's Ellie Wilson, and this is what she had to say about the fraud.
It is quite a complex sort of landscape that is ripe for fraud, unfortunately, because of the way that we have sort of neglected the regulation of autism services over time, in part because it hasn't been a priority.
And you've prosecuted many fraud cases in your career. Is that something that you agree with?
Well, I agree that certainly the healthcare system, the Medicaid system, is definitely ripe for fraud. It pays out billions of dollars a year. I think DHS's annual budget is something on the order of $25 billion a year, so that is an enormous amount of money that flows out. Healthcare is complicated, but that's not an excuse for the fraud. It's a condition that's necessary, that provides the opportunity. But the fraud exists separate and apart from that.
Can you explain a little more about the connections between Feeding Our Future, housing stabilization, and the autism treatment scams? What are the connections, if any?
Well, many of the same participants. So while we were investigating the Feeding Our Future case, I noticed that many of the defendants also had autism clinics. You saw it in their bank records payments from autism clinics. And at some point I asked the agents, some of the agents, could we run the numbers and look at what are the payments going out year over year from these autism programs at the state? And I saw a very similar pattern to what we saw in Feeding Our Future. Was a program that started quite small and grew exponentially to over $200 million a year and going out the door just in Minnesota alone. And then you look at the providers and rank them from the ones that receive the most to the smallest, and you look at the top and you see a lot of the common red flags. Companies that were all created around the same time by people that had many different companies. They were single service providers, so this isn't a general healthcare company. This is a company that seems to be created to build one particular program, and often in dilapidated storefronts or some of the buildings with many similar entities that look like they're of questionable. You go in there, the buildings look empty, despite the fact that company's billing $10 million a year. It just doesn't add up. We've all been to the doctor. Doctor's offices are busy. There's cars going in and out. There's patients going in and out. That's not what you see when you go in some of these buildings and you see, office suite after office suite of healthcare companies that are essentially doors locked, lights off, often paper covering the windows, but billing $10 million a year to the state.
Do you have a sense for how much money taxpayers lost altogether between these different frauds?
I mean, it's in the billions of dollars, certainly. I think we're going to have to dig, both, not only the U.S. Attorney's Office and law enforcement, but I think other people will have to dig into whether we'll ever have a final tally is unclear to me, but it's certainly an enormous amount.
And how much of that has been recovered?
Ooh, it's a good question. In Feeding Our Future alone, we recovered more than $50 million. We're always looking to recover assets. We can seize bank accounts. We can seize property, real estate, cars, other money we can't, obviously, if you spend it on, your day-to-day spending, even luxury spending, we often can't return that. And obviously money that goes abroad, we generally can't recover.
I want to shift gears and talk about your role. I'm curious about how much longer you'll be serving as acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota. President Donald Trump has picked, of course, Minneapolis Attorney Dan Rosen for that role. When do you expect he'll be confirmed, or how much longer do you expect to have this role?
I don't know. Whenever the Senate confirms him, he'll be here. Until then, I'm going to just lead the office as well as I can while I'm here.
Former FBI Director James Comey was just indicted last week for lying to Congress after President Trump's urging. President Trump has said he'll go after political adversaries, too. I know you can't speak to what's going on with James Comey in particular, but how would you respond if in your time in this role, if you were asked by your bosses at the Department of Justice to prosecute a Trump political adversary?
Well, that's never happened. We like most U.S. attorneys' offices, we operate autonomously. We go where the evidence takes us, and we open our investigations as we see fit, and when the evidence suggests that we should, in consultation with law enforcement, without interference from anyone.
Okay, and after this role, do you think that you'll go back to where you were leading the white-collar division? I understand you're a Minnesota native. Your name's been tossed around, it sounds like, for maybe some political offices. Have you been approached by anyone about maybe running for office, or have you ruled it out at all, considering maybe, 2026 or beyond?
No, I'm a prosecutor, not a politician, so no. They haven't. I'm doing this job while I have it, and then when Dan Rosen is confirmed, I'll see what happens next. But I'm a prosecutor.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Thompson.
Thanks a lot. Really, really appreciate it.